I'm a
Mr.
very
Conolly.
upfront man, as you've already noticed.
Yeah, I have noticed, Mr. Conolly, and I want to thank you again for joining me today. It is the 30th of March, 2021. We're just past high noon here on the East Coast, and Mr. Connolly is joining me from the United Kingdom. He created the now underground classic, although it's I don't know if it's underground anymore. Arguably not, despite the censorship. Uh, Everything is a rich man's trick, which we will definitely cover. And we were just talking about the intelligence community and the kind of independent and non-independent truther movement that has blossomed over the past couple of years. And you mentioned that the intelligence community saw this as a big problem, still do, and because of this, they have planted certain people into the independent media movement. What time period do you think they started to do this? Because this whole thing seems to me quite new. For example, it seemed to me, based on some of the research I've done into a lot of the independent media personalities and brands, that 2015 was kind of a year where there was an exponential growth. But yeah, where do you see that starting?
No, I think you've done pretty well there, Addy. Yes, I would say that that they started to see the truth movement and these kinds of videos that we're doing now that go out on YouTube. I think that they started to see them as a problem as soon as David Icke started to have a real impact, and people started to realize that he wasn't the lunatic that the BBC, for instance, kept making him out to be. And so I think, yeah, around 2013, 2014, 2015, that's when they really started putting big money and big resources into it. And as I've already said, my own belief is that men like Robert David Steele and George Webb, who we've met, and others, have been there, just to waste people's time and to put out a lot of sludge that is going to bore people, anybody looking for truth. They're going to sort of, hopefully sort of fall asleep. If I ever had the unfortunate circumstance to wind up being interviewed by Piers Morgan, I would look at him straight in his face, call him a whore, and tell him that his role in life is very simple, and that is to just blast out of his mouth endlessly a stream of gunge, rubbish, whatever you want to call it. You see, the essence of democracy is that it should be like a crystal clear pool of water. It should be like the sea in Bermuda that I've been to. It should be like water in a wash hand basin. You should be able to see everything perfectly clearly, what's going on in the country. Who's hiring who's firing who's bribing who. You should be able to to see corruption in the authorities over here. You should be able to see corrupt policemen over there and be able to do something about it. And the whole essence of what Piers Morgan does is to just try and dirty that water as the stream is going by, to just dirty that water endlessly, so that and muddy that water so you can't see what's going on. That is the role that he and the rest of the mainstream media, that's the role that they're involved in. You completely threw me by going off screen there. Was that meant to happen?
Yes, sir. Yeah, sometimes I will do that just to focus on the guest for a few seconds or so. So yeah, just
I
be
think
aware.
I think most of the time people will appreciate it more if they can see your reactions, because not every interviewer, Addy, is ever gives any thought to how important reactions to answers are. And your reactions are good. I already like them.
Oh, well,
you
thank you.
you smile well, and it's a difficult thing to explain to people, but sometimes it's very nice for a guest who's being interviewed to have acknowledgement of what they're saying and have encouragement. I've done interviews where I've been blasting away like this, thinking, oh, this is going quite well, and I'm talking away here, and it's all very happy, and then you feel like you're talking to a wall suddenly because you don't
Hmm.
get any feedback. You see what I mean? And I find that I find myself that when I'm watching, anything like this on television or on YouTube, that it's nicer somehow if you've got a conversation going on that's a two-way thing, so that
Hmm.
you've got a guest and an interviewer together rather than just a talking head who's telling you something from here. You see what I mean?
Right.
So I think it would
Okay.
be nice. It'd certainly be nicer for me if you kept it this way.
Yeah, yeah, as you wish, sir. I just I'm gonna hit this vape on occasion, so I hope that doesn't ruffle your feathers or anything.
You wouldn't believe how much that bothers the hell out of me to see a healthy, strong young man like you doing something as stupid as that. I'm, as you can find already, I'm not a man who holds back. I tell it as it is. If you only knew what vaping, smoking, alcohol, all the rest of it does to your body, you wouldn't do it, and you shouldn't do it.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I will. I'll stop. I'm tapering off, so I have tapered off a bit my use. But I appreciate the concern, Mr. Connolly.
You're
And yeah, and I wanted to thank you for that a compliment. Yeah, I think active listening is in a very important part of interviews, and it was just something I noticed because I love listening to good conversations. That it's I don't know, it's kind of like a DJ, like, and I used to DJ in college. They're kind of a dime a dozen, like interviewers and DJs, where for every what is it, 2 or dozen or so, you'll find one that's really really good. Uh, so I think just by listening, you get better at finding out what the best ways to answer questions or and ask questions are. Uh, but we're talking about the intelligence communities, and you said that they kind of run the world, and now there's I call it public intelligence, which is basically this independent movement, which I think is I'm writing a bit about it. I think it's kind of the answer to these military intelligence and private intelligence agencies, and I think pioneers like Assange and Snowden, which now they're on the topic, I would love to get your take on those guys, because they're I think in the mainstream much more widely known than say the alternative media people.
uh, with both of them, actually, no. I'll ask you, Addy. How would you fire back at somebody who said, "No, they're just another rich man's trick"? And those two men, even those two men, you have to prove that they are bona fide. It's the onus is on you to come up with some evidence that the public can be certain that they are not tricking the public as well. How would you approach that?
How That's a good question, and it's something that I've only recently reassessed a year or so, just because I've heard people, talk about Snowden, for example, as being possible CIA operation. It's tough to say, but I kind of look at the end result, which maybe is like a real politic way of looking at it. Perhaps my understanding of that is not fully developed, but it seems to me that what Snowden did was a net positive, insofar as that if he is NSA or some sort of operation against intra intelligence battle, I think that's a possibility, but it seems like he's had a net positive. Assange to me seems like more genuine and authentic just because of the situation he's he's in. Excuse me, being incarcerated. That doesn't seem like an ideal situation for anyone to be in, even if they are an asset. But
Yes,
yeah,
but how do you know he's been? How do you know he's been incarcerated? How do we
that's a
know that
good.
Ghislaine? How do we know that Ghislaine Maxwell is really in the MDC?
That is a good point, and I was going to bring that up too because we just mentioned that she just got new, I think, sex trafficking charge. I actually
Yeah,
haven't looked at the details, but yeah, but it happened early this morning,
this morning, yeah.
and yeah, that's a good point. Especially a high profile prisoner like her. She's like on the El Chapo level. And what the federales did is they said, look, this is El Chapo. They showed him to the cameras, and we don't even have a mugshot of her. So I
Well,
think that's a very valid point.
I've made this point over and over again. I mean, even when I was on with the Truthzillas a few months ago, and I mean, they all agreed that it was very, very suspicious that she was in a place called Tucked Away. And then, you do usually get some kind of film of the arrest these days if it's a high-profile figure. Generally, I mean, look at Mike Tyson, something like that. You see them in handcuffs. You see the policeman with the hand on the shoulder. You see something, and then, as you say, there's no mugshot. But the thing that I felt was most important was that when she was first, or at least when they said that she was first hauled in, there were researchers like yourself in America who immediately went on that website, and I was amazed that it was so simple. You just bring it up and you just put the name in and just say, okay, where is she? And it will tell you anybody in the whole of the United States who is in prison. You can check. Anybody can check. I was rather surprised at that, but it will give you the prison number of the prisoner, just like that. There were loads of people who tried when she was first taken into jail, and they couldn't find anything for quite a few weeks. So that, to me, very suspicious. I've since tried again, and since the authorities learned of people doing this, yes, they've given out a prison number now, but how do we know that's bona fide? And by the way, this is another reason why I don't trust Sean Atwood, because when he was asked about this and why there was no prison number for Ghislaine Maxwell, he went into a protracted diatribe. It was much too long. It was the classic example of methinks he protesteth too much. That of explaining away that, you just don't realize how incredibly busy things are in American prisons, and how what a difficult administrative nightmare it is. Are you still there, Addy? I've lost you.
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, but your picture's gone.
I've noticed that. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with my camera.
I'll just carry on for 1 second. But like I say, this is why I don't trust Sean Atwood, because he tried to smooth this over, and I felt that he was smoothing it over on behalf of the establishment. And this is why I think even now we can't be certain that Ghislaine Maxwell is incarcerated. I still think, with all the time that's left, because it's still the middle of July, that they're saying that's how long it's going to be before we get to the trial. That's a long time for them to make up another excuse or invent another story. I've got you back here. That's a long time for them to make up another story about guess who's just killed Ghislaine Maxwell, or guess how she's just managed to hang herself, or something. I have complained about this bitterly, that they I've complained to the judge. I've written to Alison J. Nathan. Not that one ever gets a reply, but I've said over and over again, that we were promised. This couldn't be a more high-profile case. There are millions, billions of people all over the world who want to know what's really going on with this. And so many people have said, "Well, come on, we were told we would see her in court during the arraignment. So what happened? How come we're not seeing the real Ghislaine Maxwell in court? We got these silly drawings instead. Come on, it's not good enough." It's not
Come
good
on,
enough.
man.
Alison J. Nathan is already very much so risking the possibility that people will write her off even before the trial begins as just another crooked cog in a crooked system. I've seen nothing so far and heard nothing so far that would lead to public confidence that Alison J. Nation is going to be a fair and honest judge. I haven't seen anything so far. I mean, I wrote to her just recently and at her private office, emailed her private office, and got an automatic message saying, "Oh, I'm not looking at this, this email address anymore. Phone my private office instead." So I phoned the private office, and guess what? The pandemic is on, and we're not answering the phone. Come on,
Yeah,
no
it's
chance.
the perfect excuse for
Exactly.
everything.
The
Yeah.
perfect excuse for everything. You
I
couldn't have
went
said it
to
better.
I went to my alma mater, the University of Wisconsin, to research this scientist, Japanese scientist who's been working with Fauci. His name's Kawaoka, and you can't go into the student center without proof that you got tested that week. They have to test, I think it's twice a week by spitting into a cup. This is on Wisconsin campus, and you can't enter any building. So it's and likewise with the election too, which I would love to get your take on it as a citizen of the United Kingdom, because I've noticed like you mentioned, Sean, and I think it's great that you're so just forthcoming with your opinions about people, and it's apparent to me you're not trying to create beef. You're just trying to give people your assessment
Yes,
of the situation. So
exactly.
that's quite interesting. Because yeah, Sean is definitely probably the leader in the podcast space in the United Kingdom. Yeah, but
At the
what are
moment, well,
your
or was Addy, to me, since I've found that since I've raised my own doubts, that his profile seems to have diminished somewhat. Maybe that's just me being arrogant. I don't know, but
well
he had
you
a
have
very high profile. He had a very high profile um, up until Christmas of last Christmas. I would say yes, he was getting very big hits, or seemed to be, and seemed to have a very big profile. But it did seem to me that he went a bit quiet once I started casting doubt on his veracity.
Yeah, well, you do have quite a bit of pull, Mr. Connolly, in the alternative media space. Like
I hope so.
my friend Detroit Dave up in Michigan, he's like, you got to check out this documentary, man. It's called Everything's a Rich Man's Trick, and then somebody else recommended it to me, and she's like, yeah, I'm the one who told Dave about that. I was like, oh, I really check this out now. So now I've watched it twice. So and just speaking on not just Sean, but in general, the alternative media in the United Kingdom. I have to say that regardless of how anybody feels about them and the level of respect or suspicion that certain people garner, because I do still pay attention, not quite as much as I used to, just because I'm producing my own stuff, to what they're saying. I find it suspicious. I think anybody can.
You're breaking up.
I don't think any.
Your, your sound is breaking up, Ali. Ali,
Okay, is that any better?
your sound is
Mic
breaking up.
check. Okay. Can you hear me now? Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better. I think you better keep the microphone a bit more still.
Okay. Okay, that might be it. But
The
I was
squirrels
just
is
making
very
the point
refreshing.
that I don't think anybody can say that it's not suspicious that the UK folks haven't really been censored. Well, I'll just name them: Anna Breeze, Sean Atwood. I don't know about Sonia Polton, but those are three of the ones that I kind of pay attention to, and they're still all on YouTube, as far as I know. And I'm like, how is this happening? Like in the United Kingdom, no less. Where I would say you guys are actually under generally stricter general censorship. Certainly, libel laws are much stricter there. And I'm just like, everything that's going on. How are these people still on YouTube? Because the Americans have all been kind of wiped out off YouTube. And there was two kind of purges, one right before the election, and then one at the beginning of January of this year, which is when my account got terminated. So I just wanted to make that point because I thought it was just weird that, like, they're still have all their followers on YouTube, and it's interesting observation that I made. Can you hear me okay there, Mr. Conolly?
Yeah, there's a couple of words just faded out for a second. You're okay now.
Okay. Did you understand the gist of what I was saying?
Sure. Yes. Yes. It's a
Okay.
good point. I wasn't aware that there'd been a purge of YouTube podcasters in America. And as you say, the strongest voices here. Of, yeah. I mean, as you say, at least the British ones are still there. Certainly, Sonia Poulton is very good. So yeah, I think you make a good point there. What did you want me to say about the election, about the American election?
I just wanted to get your thoughts on it, Mr. Conolly, because I think it's something that a lot of the UK folk kind of were hands off on a bit, as you guys have your own unique situation going on over there, but this common denominator of the pandemic definitely ties us all together. But if you followed it all, I don't know. I mean, you mentioned, and this is we're inevitably going to talk about Donald Trump, and you kind of are the last interview I listened to you, the way you spoke about Trump is the way I'm kind of being led to believe, because I didn't vote in the election, and it is my opinion that it didn't matter if I voted or not. But I was also slightly optimistic about Trump in a way that I think was a lot more nuanced than a lot of people. I saw him as an apolitical sociopath. I still do, but at the same time, there was this. And I love to hear what you have to say before I finish. The same time, there was this hope that he actually is a patriot and has the best interests of the American people at heart. But I can say now that Donald Trump has failed in many ways, in many big ways as well. And it's apparent to me that he really, even if he wasn't as controlled as others, he was still, at the end of the day, he had a price tag on him, right? So, yeah. Donald Trump, the election. What are your thoughts, Mr. Conolly? Have those changed at all?
Well, that's very open-ended. Let's be specific here, Addy, and say, what is politics all about? It's about helping your fellow Americans. It's about trying, or allegedly trying, to give ordinary people the best life possible in the best spirit of America. And yet you and I are sitting here discussing politics right now at a time when the numbers of people living on the streets of Los Angeles, if I've understood this correctly, and certainly I've seen the pictures, is growing exponentially every day. And I've been fascinated from what I've been hearing from is happening in New York. The gun crime and the amount of murders is just going through the roof, and people are terrified to even go on the street. I don't want to say that I represent a British perspective. You would have to go on the streets of Britain and actually ask people what they think. But I think, generally speaking, that generally so, the British were horrified when you had Trump and Hillary Clinton. Everybody was saying, "Well, that's a choice." Are you kidding? You got two muppets like that? They're the two best people that you've got to stand for president? And it was reinforced whenever anybody spoke to an American here at the time. They said exactly the same thing. That Americans who live here, who talk to me, they said, "Well, yeah, how have we got into this situation? Hillary Or Trump. I mean, how can we have sunk this low? And now that Trump's gone, and by the way, all that stuff about the riot at Washington or whatever, this the Senate, that was totally fake news. But I'll maybe come back to that in a moment. But I
Yeah, I
think
was there.
well, like I say, with Biden and Trump, well, it's just the same. I don't see any difference. And I think that with Biden, that you've got a real. I think America, your fellow Americans have got a real problem there now, because I know people like to lay it on with a trowel that he fell up the stairs and whatnot, but he does seem to me, and I'm experienced enough in these matters to say this, he does seem to me to be showing the initial signs of Parkinson and senility. I honestly don't think that man is going to last more than another few months, if he's not there already. I think you could have a constitutional crisis on your hands in no time at all. So, for certainly the way I see the last American election that has just taken place, just another absolute farce, just another rich man's trick. As usual, you've got a clown, a puppet of the rich, placed in the position because that's what the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, etc., want. And you couldn't be in a much worse situation. And it's just the same for me with Boris Johnson. It's exactly the same. We've got the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst running Britain and America at the moment, and it's pretty terrifying the way that things are going. And I do wonder, where all this is going to end. It's terrifying.
What was your experience like of 2020, Mr. Connolly? Because you talked about people kind of fear mongering a bit as far as the pandemic goes. And can I ask where you are located in the
In
United Kingdom?
Yorkshire, in Yorkshire, I saw. I did watch a few of your videos, and I remember somewhere you were saying you'd heard of and it's pronounced Derby, not Derby. I know you have a Kentucky Derby, but over here we call it a Derby, just to be a pain in the neck. I know that's the British for you. And you were saying that you didn't know where that was, Derby. Derby's about it's about 80, 90 miles away from where I am, and I do find that Americans generally have very little idea of British geography and European geography. So basically, I'm sort of pretty much right in the middle of England.
That's an accurate statement. Yeah, Americans are not known for their geography. I
No,
certainly have
they're
a
not.
better. And I think that was by design, which is something you talk about in your documentary, just the public education system in general. And ever since I watched your documentary, I've had this kind of fantasy of being in a school, like a public school, and just showing them like all these cool documentaries like yours and all these other ones, and just not saying anything. But I'm sure I would get kicked out in like 3 days once they went and talked to their parents about, oh, we saw this crazy documentary. And once one parent complains, it's like I've come to the conclusion that the best way to teach is actually by doing something like this on the internet, and just try to get it out to as many people as possible. But yeah, my European geography understanding is certainly better than United Kingdom. I actually interviewed a former prison guard who's an author from Yorkshire, Sam
Yeah,
Sameth,
yeah, I saw that.
as well. Yeah. So, any further thoughts on 2020? Did you kind of know what was happening right away? Did you think, oh, this is a big power play by the elites, or was it more of a slow realization?
Oh, no. I knew straight away that it was a big power play. The only thing that was became interesting was that the scientists who I know, when I was asking them about it, I started asking, is there really such a bug or is the whole thing just a phantom? And the first thing I heard was, yes, the bug is real, but it's not at all dangerous to anybody who. The only people who are in any sense at risk are those who've got an underlying serious medical condition, like somebody who's just had a heart attack, because the public don't realize that what bacteria does is to attack the weak spots in your body. If you've just had a serious injury, or if you've just had a heart attack, or if you've got lung problems or whatever, that's where the bacteria go, you see, to accelerate the process so it can kill you and eat you up. So, as I say, the scientific people who I respect, they said this has definitely been created by Nazis, because basically anybody who's weak or old, very old, yes, it can hurt or kill them, but everybody else is just going to be like a dose of flu. It's not a big deal, especially anybody young and strong like yourself. It's not going to be a problem. Having said that, I'm now hearing that there's how shall I put this? That there are aspects of it that the scientists who I respect are a little confused and concerned about. They're saying that this is something unlike anything they've ever seen before. And I don't think I should, I try to take my responsibilities very seriously. And I don't want to elaborate on that, because I don't believe that this is going to, as a public health problem, is going to escalate. Like everything else, it'll just go away. I don't believe that there's any reason to worry. I want to be as simple as that. It's just that the scientists who I know are saying that they're encountering interesting anomalies that they themselves want more time to look into. So I would say that as far as 2020 is concerned, generally, I think it'll be remembered as the year that never happened. Everything just And in actual fact, Addy, to make a philosophical point, I wonder if it'll make people realize. You know how people say you don't know what you've got until it's gone, and I had no idea that it meant anything to me to be able to switch on the television and, for instance, watch the rugby internationals. We've just had what's called the Six Nations Championship, which I notice a lot of Americans are starting to take notice of in this age. They're starting to get curious about rugby, because obviously it came before American football. And a lot of Americans are starting to enjoy it and get curious about it, because with the players not having helmets, not having padding, it makes Americans wonder just how tough they are. And boy, are they tough! The current England side, that's men as tough as I think you'll ever see. But I'm sorry, I'm getting a little off track. My point is that I never realised how much it meant to me before to be able to switch on the TV and see one of the Six Nations internationals. That whenever you see the Welsh play a game, especially when it's Wales against England, the whole Welsh crowd sing the anthem together, and it makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. It's the most beautiful anthem by a mile, the Welsh national anthem. It's absolutely beautiful, and I don't know. I'm amazed at how much I've missed that, and missed just the fact that you can see a crowd getting excited at a football game or a rugby game or whatever, and being able to go out on a sunny day, to the parks around and seeing big groups of people enjoying the sunshine. We've had it today, and it's something that it's a vibrancy that I didn't realize how much it meant to me. So I think there's a lot of people who when things get back to normal, if they ever do, and I'm not sure they ever will, but I think it's possible we may appreciate crowds and company and the fact that you can have a bustling city centre more than we ever did in the past, and maybe it'll make a few people count their blessings, and maybe that'll be a good thing. Who knows?
Yeah, it was something I had an experience with. I'm here in Myrtle Beach, and this was actually last month, I believe. I went with a friend, and we just played volleyball. And after we're done, I was like, "Man, that was great." There's people walking around, and there's restaurants right there. And I was like, "Man, that sense of just hanging out in the community is something that I just forgot about." I just because it
Yeah,
hadn't
no,
happened in so long.
yeah, we take it for granted, and yet
Yeah.
anything can end. And it may be, it's all about trying to make something good out of something negative, always. And I think maybe that if things ever do get back to normal, that maybe a few people will count their blessings over some things more than they did before. But really, Addy, at this moment, I fear for America much more than I do for this country. We have had detrimental effects on this society. Yes, we have. But it seems to be devastating America with the homelessness that I've talked about in California. I mean, there's a YouTube video at the moment that's talking about, the exodus from California. Everyone's leaving. Are we going to see the end of Hollywood? It looks to me like that's not by any means something that you can completely dismiss at the moment. I mean, I know the Hollywood people are rich and they've got security guards, so maybe they don't need to be as frightened. But honestly, with the way that things are going, it makes me wonder if Hollywood will still be there if they decide to keep this pandemic nonsense going. And with the way that things are, with Prince Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell and all the rest of it, they just might. It really is very, very difficult to make any predictions as to where we're headed, over this. Very difficult.
I wanted to ask about your past work. Is this type of work something that you've always done, or have you had other careers?
Other careers. Oh yeah, I don't want to bore people with too much of this, but when I started out. It was very interesting to me the other day. For some reason, I wound up when I was looking at YouTube. There was a thumbnail for that old movie called Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I haven't.
Uh, that's a movie that, even though it's an old movie, I think you might find it interesting because it's a good movie, and it led to the writer director Michael Cimino being given the opportunity to make The Deer Hunter, which won every awards, in the shop for that year. I mean, the Deer Hunter is one of the most famous. It's like The Godfather. It's one of the most famous movies ever, and it interested me that Cimino, he didn't go to film school, and he didn't start off in the way that I imagined he would. He started off as like an architecture student, and he just sent a spec script to Malpaso, the Clint Eastwood film company, and Clint Eastwood liked it and picked it up, and bingo, this young man who was barely your age, Michael Cimino, when he started off, he suddenly found he had this amazing director's career. It would have. I wish that had happened to me. It would have been very nice if it had. But no, I started off as he did, as an artist. I started out as a painter, but nobody could really get their head around me because I was also an athlete. I was a squash player. Quite a few Americans who tried to interview me or made videos about me have wondered. They've looked at this. One of the first ones that ever came out. The man was reading it and saying he's also squash player. I'm not quite sure what that is, which I found that very amusing. But you see, nobody could get their head around what I was or who I was or where I was coming from, because it's very unusual to have someone who's a painter, and they're really heavily into the arts, and I was very highly regarded. When I was a student, everybody was saying, "Oh, you're definitely going to be the next Salvador Dali, or the next Magritte," and that was great. I thought, I was very happy about people saying that. But at the same time, I know in America you have this thing about jocks. I mean, have I got that right about athletes? Yeah.
Like a stereotype about jocks.
Well, I think if I had been brought up in America, I think that's how I would have been stereotyped,
Okay.
because I was one of the best squash players at university, and I started out trying to get into the BBC, and sent scripts and whatnot to Hollywood, but I just kept getting plagiarized and ripped off. I was plagiarized by Universal, sorry, by Paramount Pictures. I had a lot of phone calls with them back and forward to Hollywood. It was actually Star Trek who plagiarized me. I had a very nice liaison called Josh, who right here I was on the phone in the middle of the night to Hollywood doing meetings with them. I would go to school to teach them the morning after, and I was like this. I was half dead. The kids were wondering what the hell was wrong with me. It was an absolutely crazy time in my life. But I realize now that the establishment have had me basically under a microscope from the day I was born, because of my grandfather, who was also Francis Conolly. He was one of the men who created a very important part of British political history that probably you won't have heard of, called the Jarrow March. Have you heard of that, Addy? No? No, it disappeared again. You still there?
I have not. What could you explain that for those that don't know?
Oh, quick history lesson. In the 1930s, unemployment in Britain had reached ridiculous levels, and it was a real blight upon society. And it was particularly bad in the northeast of England. And I wish I had been there to tell them why it was so bad at the time, because like everything else, it was a rich man's trick. The area that I'm from, which is Newcastle, I moved south, but Newcastle is up in the northeast of England. It's not far from the Scottish border. And that was the place from Glasgow across to Newcastle where that was the shipbuilding industry, and it was known as the workshop of the world. And had the men who were there at that time realized their own power in the fact that they were the only men in the world who could build ships, they could have just about run the world on their own had they had a political sense, but they didn't have a political sense. So they were hammered particularly hard by the establishment, who wanted to keep them under control. And the best way to do that is to always ensure that there's a lot of unemployment. So the unemployment got so serious that the men who were the brightest men and the strongest men around at that time got together and said, look, we're going to have to do something about this that's very strong politically. And they organized what was called the Jarrow March, which was a huge group of men just walking down the most hideous roads, which they had then, all the way from Newcastle to London, which is about 270 miles. And when they got to the Houses of Parliament, they lobbied Parliament and said, we're invisible to you. You don't care about us. And it became a very, very important, and I would say even seminal moment in British political history. And well, my grandfather was one of the primary figures in organizing the march. And I've since realized that if you're a person who has has some kind of really dramatic political effect, the security services target your family, and they do, the reports and all the files on everybody who you're related to, all your friends and your offspring. And if there's any sign that your offspring might be, just as effective as you are, then they get targeted. And throughout their life, they try to hurt their career, and that is what has happened to me right through my career. They've tried all the way through to make sure I couldn't get a job right at the very top. They've tried all the way through to make sure I couldn't get any funding. That was why the movie that you've seen, JFK to 9/11, Everything is Rich Man's Trick, that's why I was never able to get any funding for it, and still can't get any distribution for it. I hope that wasn't too long an answer.
No, that was great, Mr. Conolly. And do you have a PayPal or a Patreon or a GoFundMe so people can help you out that way? Because I recall in one interview I listened to you that you did that you actually haven't really gotten paid for your documentary. So I'm sure people would like to know that if they can help you up a little bit.
No, well, like I say, a lot of people. I mean, Jason Goodman was a good example. Tried to get me to, go to Patreon, try this, try that, try the other. But as I've tried to explain many times to people, the internet is the rich man's baby. The internet belongs to the elite. They would never have created it. They would never have let you and I do this if they ever thought that it was possible for a man like me or a man like you to garner billions or trillions of dollars or pounds or whatever for the kind of projects that we want to do through the internet. We tried a crowdfunding thing, and they just destroyed it. It just, it was obvious that they were just messing around with it. Whether it's the dark web or however you want to say it, I don't know. I'm not a computer expert and don't want to be. But the one thing you can be certain of is that a man like me will never be able to raise capital through the internet. The elite won't allow that. It'll never happen. It'll never happen ever. The only see, this is why when people started suggesting that I put the film out as a book, which is, it's coming out soon. That's why I went along with it, because hardly anybody reads, and book buying isn't something that maybe that the elite take all that seriously. They know that only 2% of people, I don't know if you know that yourself, that only 2% of people buy and read books. It's very sad. But
Wow, I didn't realize it was that low. That's
yeah,
astounding.
2%, just 2%. But maybe I can raise some funds that way. I hope so. My goal, obviously, because to anybody again who's coming to this for the first time, who hasn't seen me on TV before, I would invite any of them to look at the public comments, but below any of the copies of my movie that people like Alexander Ravella, who I would love to give another little wave to, nice man, who likes my work. He uploaded a good copy. All of the public comments, they always say the whole of the world has got to see this movie. You just don't realize how important it is. You'll never look at the world in the same way ever again once you've seen this film. You've got to see it. The whole world should see it. It should be seen in every college. It should be seen in every school. This is what you get all the way down, the public comments section. And therefore, obviously, what I'm trying to do is to get the movie into cinemas all over the world. And until the day that somebody who has the means to help me does so, it won't happen. Over the last month or so, actually, it's longer than that. It's more like a couple of months. I've been trying to get in touch with a couple of men. I don't know if you've heard of them. Do you know the names of Mike Cannon Brooks and Scott Farquhar? You heard of those names?
I haven't, sir.
Well, they are two genius Australian computer software designers, and they run a company called Atlassian in Australia, and they're the latest, like Mark Zuckerberg level success in software in the world. The whole world is now using Atlassian products, and they've bought the two biggest houses and the most expensive houses in Sydney. And I think it seems as if what you've got there is just two really, really nice, decent, and good men. I don't think that the security services have had had time, because it's happened so quickly, to corrupt them or control them in any way. I hope I'm right about this. I've been trying for a couple of months now to get in touch with them. There's been all kinds of email addresses, video at Atlassian and press at Atlassian and whatnot. And I've tried and tried and tried to get through to them with no success via email. And I will bet you anything you like, it's because the security services are blocking those emails. And I sent a letter. How long is this now? It's now nearly a month ago. I sent a letter, uh, which I posted, and I was told that they would have it within a week. And this is nearly a month. And on the tracking number, it's still saying it's on its way. And I went down to the local sorting office to say, look, someone's got to do something about this. I've paid for this. The woman put the number into her own computer, and she came back and said, oh, Mr. Conolly, it's not even left the country yet. Even the website is lying to you. It's not left the country yet because the customs have held it up. How can I fight against this? How can I fight against this, my friend? This is what I'm up against all the time. But you are up against it as well. This is what the public are up against. These are the kind of dirty tricks that the CIA, MI5, Mossad, etc., this is what the intelligence community of the whole world is playing on you right now. And this is why it's so difficult to get change.
That's a difficult question to answer. Certainly, it's one of the reasons that it's kind of invoked in me an interest in getting a ham radio license and getting radio communications. But communicating across continents is I think a different ball game altogether.
You can't do that.
Yeah, so it's tough, and it just makes you realize that sort of switch that they have to turn the lights on and off or anything, right? And that immense power that it's granted to them. If they wanted to
say the reason why I've just brought that up is that I hope someone in Australia, someone who lives in Sydney, Australia, might see this. And if they do, could you please go and knock on the door of number 560, what is it, New South Head Road, the Fairwater Mansion in Sydney Harbour, Australia, and please tell Mike Cannon Brooks and Scott Farquhar I've been trying to get in touch with them. My Australian friends who have told me that they'll be trying themselves, but in what way are they going to be stopped? Who knows? If there's somebody in Sydney, Australia, who sees this, or if those two men see it, I've been trying to get in touch with them because I think it's possible that they might want to help, because they. Geez, how can I say this? All philanthropy is a rich man's trick, Daddy. Whenever you hear, Ghislaine Maxwell is the classic example. You know how she had this Terramar project? She's going to save the oceans like a good little girl, etc. All of those kinds of things. If ever you hear of a celebrity who they've got an AIDS charity or whatever, it's always a smokescreen. It's always being done to make you think that they're a good person when they're not. It's just to mislead people, just like everything is there to mislead people. Having said that, I think it might not be the case with Mike Cannon Brooks and Scott Farquhar. It might not be, because from the research I've done, it does seem as if they're genuinely trying to to give charities as much as they possibly can. They've even talked about giving a tenth of their profits. Every single pound they want to give 10 pence to charity. That's a beautiful thing. If these men are as wonderful as they seem to be, I would love to talk to them. Put it that way.
And you would be interested in getting a private paywall set up by them so that you could take donations and sponsorship, or what would be
Well, no,
your end state?
it's you see, all at the moment, all I would need would be about somewhere between 100 and 200,000 pounds to uprate my film in the ways that I would like to, because I would still like to illustrate it better. And then you've got to make a video package for cinemas, specifically for cinema, so it could be shown on a big screen to the same level of detail that you've seen it on online. And that, as I say, would all cost about somewhere between 100 and 200K. Now, to people who are billionaires, that's chicken feed. It's nothing. If I had that, I would then be able to take it into Europe. I would then be able to, you see, I've lost count of the amount of Europeans who've said, Mr. Conolly, what the hell are you playing at? We desperately need your movie. Why haven't you provided this? I've only just learned in the last couple of days that somebody went ahead in Holland and they've created a version of my film that you can see on YouTube. If there's any Dutch people out there who see this, and it's got subtitles. They've subtitled the whole film. It must have been a mountain of work, but it was something that I wanted done. It was something that I wanted to see happen. But I want people to go and see this movie in cinemas, because if you see a movie in cinema, that's like a vote. That's not like seeing it online. If you're going to watch something in a movie and you're paying, if you're going to see something in a cinema and you're paying for the privilege, that means it means something to you. You see it as important. And if the whole world was doing that, it would really hurt the establishment. If the whole world was going to see my movie in cinemas, that would really, and that's why they're stopping me from doing it, you see. But this is what needs to happen. All over Europe, people have written to me. Spanish, Portuguese, Italians, even the Chinese have written to me and said, Mr. Conolly, what the hell's going on? Why haven't you provided this with subtitles so that my countrymen can see it? I've got to say yet again, I have tried and tried and tried to do this. I want to do this. I still hope it might happen. But, I said this on the Charlie Robinson show. I hope it's not boring people by now. But it won't happen until the day that either I myself come into a windfall of some kind, or a very rich man like Mike Cannon Brooks helps me out financially.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and shout out to Charlie Robinson. I'm actually finishing up his second book right now.
His books are good. Charlie's a good writer. Writer.
Yeah, I agree. And this actually is a great segue to my next question. Who are some of the independent media people that you really like their work or you respect? I know you mentioned Sonia Poulton briefly before, and we just talked about Charlie for a second. Anybody else that you're like, think, oh wow, they're doing great work, they're on the ball, or maybe they're underrated, underappreciated?
Well, no, I mean, Sonia's work I saw just after I'd made my film, and Charlie is good, but I've found sadly that recently, I mean, Andy Young, the interview that he did with me, I mean, they were very important interviews on Raconteurs News. Anybody who's interested in this, because it's still there somewhere online, Um, it was Andy who told me live on air, and I almost fell out my chair here, that the hits were being underreported by 200 times. And looking at the amount of interest and the amount of ripping off of my film that had already happened, I was like, my God, are you kidding? Well, it's already this many million. And he said, well, yeah. He said, it looks like it's been seen genuinely over 1 billion times. And that really hit me very, very hard. You know, it really, really did. And I mean, it was great, but I thought that, well, I knew that they were messing around with the level of interest. I knew that they were messing around with the hits. But I hadn't imagined it. I thought it would be about 10 times or 20 times. I didn't realize it was 200 times. And this is why they're so scared of me and my work. But like I say, Andy's packed up now. I haven't heard much from Justin Stellman recently. I think he was overwhelmed, I think, with interest after he interviewed me. That was the sense I got. Patrick Timpone, when I was on his show, that was important. Patrick's nice. So yeah, there are still some decent people out there.
Okay, excellent. And what do you think the best way to persuade people is? Perhaps it's a bit redundant because you made this fantastic documentary. But yeah, I mean, in terms of media and then just interpersonal communication too. What do you think? Because I think that's a huge aspect that is in many ways underlooked of the work that we do. And you talked before about how certain people have this gift for gab, and they are the ones that get put in by the intelligence services to be stooges or a plan or whatnot. But yeah, what's the best way that you've found to persuade?
The best way to persuade. Gosh, Andy, that's the best question I've ever been asked. Congratulations.
Oh wow, that's quite a compliment.
Well, people will probably think, well, here's a man stalling for time because he's trying to come up with a good answer. The best way to persuade. You see, I'm tempted here to say that the only way you ever get through to somebody is when you overcome their personal selfishness. Because most of the time, people won't listen to you unless they feel in some way they're going to benefit from it. The thing that you have to do is to overcome what really is the problem, the main problem with the whole of humanity, which is the natural human selfishness of most people. People are not altruistic genuinely. It's me, 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 me. You know, for a very long time after my movie went viral, there was a dichotomy. The world was bifurcated, big word for you, into two camps. Whenever I was listening to people on trains, supermarkets, in pubs, wherever, and anybody ever brought up anything to do with what we're talking about now, the more sort of dopey people would instantly react by going, "Oh, is this conspiracy theory?" That's how they talk about around here. That's a Yorkshire dialect for you. They talk like this around here. Conspiracy theory. Is that what you're on about? I don't mean that in an unkind way, by the way. I really don't.
No, I love you guys' accents, the variety
Yeah,
of English accents. It's
I
great.
know Americans can never get over how many stupid bloody dialects we've got. It's amazing. It really is, this country, the amount of dialect. Bill Bryson, I don't know if you've ever read Bill Bryson, could never get over the travel writer. He was very popular in this country about 10 years ago. His star is waning a bit now, but he could not get over the amount of and the thing he couldn't get over even more, Addy, is that all Americans pretty much speak the same dialect, in spite of the huge distances that there are between, for instance, Los Angeles and New York. I mean, Los Angeles based man, born and bred, won't have any difficulty understanding a New Yorker and vice versa. And somebody from Mississippi doesn't have a hard time understanding somebody from Washington. The dialect of America is pretty much all the same. And that amazed Bill Bryson because he thought, well, surely it should be exactly the opposite. You know, you got this huge country like North America, where you live. You would think that that would militate against a consistent accent that went right across the country. Whereas you would think with England being so small, we'd all talk the same way. And yet, there, I mean, you could go into pubs in Glasgow right now and not be able to understand a single word. Oh well, no, that's maybe a bit of an exaggeration. You could go into pubs in Scotland, and 80% of it. And if someone walks up to you and says, "Are you going to hoot a doogie?"
Yeah.
You've got no idea what that means.
Yeah, Scottish accents are another thing entirely.
They're really something. But where I come from, I mean, I'll give you the most difficult one. If you were to visit Newcastle and you were with someone, and someone walked up to you and said, just like this, "You and your man are young." See, you haven't got a clue what that is. Not a clue. It's a foreign language, you know. It baffles people. It baffles people in England why we, have and where I live now isn't very far from Leeds and Bradford, which are contiguous cities, and yet people in Leeds say that they can tell when someone is from Bradford, and, and vice versa. It's we've got right off track here, but it is an interesting subject area, as to why England has these. This is so replete with different ways of speaking.
Yeah, and you do see some regional accents in the U.S., but they're much weaker than the ones in the
Yeah.
United Kingdom. And what you said is true. Most Americans have no problem speaking with each other, and especially with the internet now. I think the regionalization of dialect and accents is becoming less and less strong. I think through internet media largely has a lot to do with that. So I love going to England and hearing the different accents, and I think it's a skill too of distinguishing between paying attention to the content of what somebody is saying and the accent with which they're saying it. It's like two different attentional skills in terms of listening. But as far as your documentary, sir, let's back up a little bit. What sources do you go for in terms of the daily news or the weekly news? Where do you look to? Is it changing constantly? Is there any mainstream that you pay attention to, or is it kind of how does that work for you? Geopolitical news. What are your sources that you like to go to, if any?
Do you mean? I mean, we're talking about on a day-to-day basis. How do I try to find out what's going on? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, and I don't even know if that's a focus for you because you do look at the big picture in history. Because I know you're a big reader. But just for daily news, let's say current events, is that something you pay attention to as far as going to a certain source or cycling sources?
Well, the most important thing I would say here is for people to realize that what you've got to do with mainstream media is always to read between the lines. That's the important thing, and to take everything that they say with a pinch of salt. In every lie, there's a connection with the truth of some kind. The skill of seeing or hearing anything on mainstream media is to work out what it is. So I don't specifically target any. I mean, like today with the Ghislaine Maxwell news, straight away I'm asking myself, is that just another attempt to control the narrative? Or they've added another part to the prosecution. They found another important witness. Is that true? I think that an awful lot of the things that we've been hearing about Ghislaine Maxwell in the last few months, especially, she keeps on asking for bail and they keep refusing for bail. And I think just about every story that we've heard has been written in, MI5 headquarters in Whitehall or somewhere in Langley, and they're just thinking, well, what can we get away with next? What can we say to pad this out, pad this out, pad this out, pad this out? Keep the news about Ghislaine Maxwell going in order to keep the spotlight off Prince Andrew. That's the real purpose of it. So you have a situation there, you see, where even the lies are something that you do need to be picking up on every day. I mean, that's really how I approach mainstream media, is to say to myself, well, what lie are they going to tell today? And what does it tell me about the way that things are going, you see? And with the mainstream media, the important thing to focus on is to try and ask yourself, how much autonomy do the mainstream media journalists have and how much do they not have? Over the last few months, it's been very clear. I mean, there was this interview with a woman called Jenny Bond on the BBC the day after the Emily Maitlis interview. And she could not have excoriated Prince Andrew any more than she did. I mean, she was saying flat out, he's a joke, this whole thing about the not sweating and all the rest of it is going to haunt him to his grave. He's become she did say he's become a laughingstock. Now that did surprise me. It did, because Jenny Bond was classically BBC for decades. She was one of those typical middle class ladies who would appear on BBC and give the establishment view of everything. And here she is being interviewed. She was being interviewed on ITV's this morning, and she was tearing him apart. I would say that generally, from what I've picked up from the mainstream media, some of it that's come from your own country, from like Tucker Carlson, kind of figures. Some of it from Europe, some of it from Britain, obviously. I would say that the establishment is still controlling the narrative. I would say 75% of the time. But I would say that they haven't got complete control of the narrative. I would say that we are seeing only the tip of the iceberg. That's what we're seeing with Ghislaine Maxwell. It's the tip of the iceberg. And we still don't know what the rest of the iceberg looks like. But at least we're seeing the tip of the iceberg. What can we say, Addy, at this moment that we know for certain is real, that cannot be denied as being real? No matter what anybody says about trickery and fake news, Prince Andrew did that interview. He did. And he couldn't have blown it any more than he has. And the mainstream media, that the establishment like to think they control completely, he's hardly been out of the mainstream media ever since. And it is obvious that they would, the whole Oprah Winfrey thing, it's obvious that they're desperate to get something else big into the news to get the spotlight off him, and it's not working. So, I would say that, as I say, at the moment, I look at news from all over the world, or what purports to be news. I look at fake news coming from all over the world and ask myself every day, what can I glean from it? And what I glean from it at the moment is that the establishment must be very, very, very nervous.
Yeah. And Yeah, I think you're right about that. And similar vein, but just switching gears to your documentary, what sources did you use for that? Was that strictly books, or was it a combination
Uh,
of
ev-
medium?
ev- Everything, and my memory, my own notes from sometimes as much as 25 or even 30 years ago were critically important. Um, it might be an idea to bring up Ollie Domagard here, because he again is another one who's gone very quiet since I called him out, because he tried to discredit me after building what seemed to be a reputation online, and a lot of people, I think, listening to him. He tried to discredit me over the James Files being the most important assassin story. When he started saying, Ollie Domagard, that there was no doubt about it, that Files was telling the truth. That was it. He was. I knew then that he was a spy, because that story, the James Files being the most important shooter, and he had this some kind of super gun. That's classic CIA style disinformation. If anybody who wonders what I'm talking about here, if you look at the interviews with James Files that you can see online, that man looks about 60 to 61 during his interview, and he's talking about something that happened 50 years before. Well, that means he'll have been 10 years old during the Kennedy assassination. They gave a super gun to a 10-year-old and said, shoot at the president. I don't think so, Addy. No chance. I don't think so. So, like I say, Ollie Domagard, he also tried to um, call me out on the JD Tibbet thing that came up. That was the most important part of me finding the truth, because I remember very specifically, and I did make notes on it at the time, that when JD Tibbet was buried, when they had his funeral, that the witnesses who were there said there was something very odd going on during the Tippett funeral, and they just could not figure out what it was. But his family were not allowed to look, to have the coffin lid removed and to look at him one last time. His wife wanted to say goodbye, but I remember I wrote it down that he was buried with unseemly haste, and I had that fragment written down for years because I knew there was something huge there, but I didn't know what it was. You see. And I didn't find out until Robert D. Morningstar's work came along. As you've seen with the faces, between Kennedy and Tibbet being so similar. You've frozen up, Addy. Are you still hearing me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I didn't even notice that I was frozen. Let me fix that. Yeah, please continue. That was great.
Yeah, like I say, that was such an important moment with J.D. Tibbet, that Ollie Domagard, that he tried to discredit it. He said he'd found Tibbet's family or something, and they denied the whole thing. I mean, we're talking about something 50 years ago. Absolute nonsense. He's just trying to discredit me. Those notes, like I say, from like 30 years ago, became incredibly important. The books were important. The periodicals, the magazines. I had a magazine that was specifically devoted to what really happened to Marilyn Monroe, because obviously that tied in with what happened to Jack Kennedy. So it came from the amount of sources. Really, truly, it's innumerable. I found things everywhere. Yes, the books were tremendously important, and even though I know that no one will do this, because no one will, if you want to look at what I suppose is the most important evidence, then yes, read best evidence. But no one will. And they certainly won't read it 3 times as I did, because it's like this thick. It's more than than a stack of Bibles pushed together. I mean, David Lifton was the researcher from heaven. I mean, the most thorough man of all time. But like I said, it took me months to get hold of that book. It was a long time. They managed to keep that out of my hands. Because there were a couple of books, one of which took me a year to get hold of, the Joachim Uesten book, How Kennedy Was Really Killed, The Awful Truth. Took me a long time to get those books. And once I'd got them, I could see why. Because bit by bit by bit, it was the building until I had, and I've said this in interviews before, until I had what I knew was a jigsaw puzzle, and I'd got all the right pieces. I knew the pieces were there, but I didn't have the box lid. I didn't know how they all fitted together. When Robert D. Morningstar came along, and I just happened to be researching Tippett at the same time, when that piece came along, bang, got it.
That's excellent. And how long were you thinking about doing something like this before you started to work on it? Because it was released in 2014, correct?
Yeah, well, how long was that? Well, that's a more difficult one. I always wanted to know the truth about the Kennedy assassination right throughout my life. And I always did feel, I remember when I was on the Richie Allen show, saying that I always did feel that if only we knew the truth about what really happened with Jack Kennedy, that it would have the effect of throwing open a window in a room that had been darkened for decades and letting sunlight stream in. And for the first time ever, people would be able to see what the Western world really was, because people just had no idea what the Western world really was. And I'm delighted that I think my film has had that effect. That's why people on the public comment section, they always say, you won't look at anything ever again in the same way after you've seen this film, because you just don't know what reality is. No one's ever told you what reality is. So, I always wanted to know the truth. I didn't mean for this to be my career. I mean, I was in the middle of writing a screenplay for a man called David Parfit, who won the Oscar for Shakespeare in Love, and it looked like that, again, like that was one of the things that was going to happen, and it again, probably establishment interference, that it just never quite happened. There was a couple of war films of mine that he was interested in producing, and I was actually in the middle of another rewrite of one of those scripts when 9/11 happened. So I didn't have much space in my head at the time to think about 9/11, because I was thinking so much about something else. And believe me, there's nothing takes up the space in your brain like a screenplay, especially an epic screenplay. So it was difficult when 9/11 happened to think about it. But I did think straight away, no, there's something wrong there. That's a trick. And whenever there was anything, on the news or any documentary or any, Newsnight special or anything about the 9/11, I very, very quickly realized. I think the first thing was the way that the market moved. There were people who were experts on Wall Street, and they very quickly said, they knew the big players. They knew this was coming, because this price changed and that stock price went up, that stock price went down. They knew this was coming. They had foreknowledge. So you've frozen up again.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're to the short selling of the airlines, right?
Yes,
Mainly.
that was one of them. But
as
that
far
wasn't
as right before, I think it was on the 10th or the 9th or that week. Everybody
Yeah.
was, or these companies, which I guess was backed to, or and I actually learned this from Sean. It was traced back to a CIA company or something, and
Well, that's
everybody got deputized, and they
yeah.
couldn't
Well,
say
the
anything
thing
without
is
going
that
to jail.
the CIA is mixed up in business, and business is always mixed up with the CIA because money is power. You see, so I didn't really end the answer very well. But like I say, that I didn't mean for this to be the pinnacle of my career, if you want to put it that way. I didn't, life is like that. It works out in ways that you never expect. I always did want to make a documentary to find out the whole truth about Kennedy right throughout my whole life. And I think we've just got to be grateful for the internet, because it was mainly this instrument we're using now that allowed me to finally crack the whole truth, rather than just nibbles of it that had been achieved prior to me. I mean, there was a pretty decent effort by, what was his name? Chris Dunkley, I think was his name, on Channel 4. Um, he had a pretty good go at it, but he was misled by some spurious evidence on the acoustics. He didn't realize the CIA were controlling the what he was being told about the acoustic evidence, and the shots that had been picked up on a Dick the Belt or something. That was all spurious. This is the kind of thing that the CIA does. And then Kevin Godley and Lowell Cream, they had a very good go at it as well. They were the two of the musicians who were in the band 10cc. I don't know if you ever heard of them. I don't know if you ever heard the record called "I'm Not in Love" by 10cc.
Possibly.
I'm not in love, that one. But great song. But Kevin Godley was one of the men. Kevin Godley did write back to me. He was one of the few pop stars that wrote back to me, and said he thought the film was a magnificent film. And he said, you've done a fantastic job. And I said, well, is there no way one of the rock stars that you know of in the industry, the rich rock stars, could one of them not help me? And that has been the biggest disappointment of my whole life. I have lambasted Peter Gabriel many times for ignoring me. He's not the man that I thought he was at all. And there have been many others. I mean, Rick Wakeman took notice of me as well. It's hurt me particularly because they would never have had the careers they had unless we had thought that we had genuine freedom in Britain at that time. It was the free Western democratic world that allowed men to be rock stars. They wouldn't have been able to. They couldn't do it in Russia. They couldn't do it in a communist satellite. They couldn't do it there. It could only have happened here. And yet, as soon as democracy is under threat, as soon as our freedom is under threat, the people who should be doing most to defend it are doing nothing. And so you wind up asking yourself, to what extent has every rock star been involved in some way in this? I don't want to say pedophilia, but to what extent have they been mixed up with underage girls? I'm not saying they all have. You never get that. You don't get a situation where all men in a particular group. People have different tastes, but it does make me wonder now, how many of the big name rock stars are at this moment nervous about where things may go with this whole Ghislaine Maxwell thing, and how much might come out. You see, I mean, there's going to be many Hollywood actors and Hollywood movie stars, famous directors. All of the cream of the men on this planet at this moment, I think, will be very nervous about where the Ghislaine Maxwell trial might go, and that's why I'm sure that it'll be very carefully controlled.
I would be shocked if it went to trial.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think you're right. I think and that's why Mr. Well, first off, you agree that Epstein is dead, or would you say he's alive?
That's like saying, do I think that Lee Harvey Oswald is dead, and do I think that Jack Ruby died in jail? The point, Addy, is that they do have the power. The CIA at that time, the establishment at that time, could have faked Jack Ruby's death. They could have faked Lee Harvey Oswald's death. There was a man who wrote to me who preferred to remain anonymous, who said he was there in the basement when the shooting happened. And I was like, wow, what's he telling me here? And he said he was sure that it was fake because there was no blood. Now, I don't want to use that as a source to tell the world I'm certain that Lee Harvey Oswald was not killed, and I'm certain that Jack Ruby did not die of in jail of cancer. I don't want to say that, but all I'm saying is I think it's possible that both of those deaths have been faked. I'm sure that you yourself have seen the photographs that some people have put online of what was purported to be Jeffrey Epstein's corpse being wheeled out, and they took the photograph, that still, which showed the shape of his ear and the shape of his nose, and compared it to the real Jeffrey Epstein, and it didn't match. Corpses can't change. A cadaver can't change within the space of a few hours as rigor mortis sets in. But I didn't think their attempt to say this is the real Jeffrey Epstein being wheeled away. I would say that the odds are, I would say the odds are that having done as much as he did for the establishment for so long, in providing so many sex toys to so many men for so long, I think the odds are that it's more likely he's still alive.
Wow. And wow, that's fascinating. I want to switch to books, Mr. Conolly. What are a couple books, 3 books or so that you have gifted to other people that you really like to give to other people? Maybe your 3.
Which books do I think are most important to read? Is that what you're?
Yeah, that's another way to ask it. Yeah.
I would say that any thinking man at this moment in history, definitely needs to read Animal Farm and 1984. Anybody who hasn't done that already, that alone, that is critically important. In third place, I don't really want to say third place, but the top 3, definitely Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Maynard Persig, who is definitely the greatest American who ever lived, as far as I'm concerned. Because that is pretty much the most important book you'll ever read. And those 3 aside, I would say that, and obviously, you can tell I'm a huge George Orwell fan, but there are not many books, and Orwell has said this himself, that become part of the furniture of your memory, and that are so powerful and so brilliant that they linger and change the way that you think. And if anybody out there watching this really does want to come away from a reading experience feeling that it's been so worthwhile because now they really understand something they didn't understand before, and they've learned something that they could quote from, and it really made them a stronger and better person. And certainly anybody who has any aspirations to be a young writer, I would say you've got to start with George Orwell's essays. You need to read things like, the greatest one is definitely Politics in the English Language. That is, people quote from that endlessly. I have heard people quote from that on the television, on the radio. If you've ever heard anybody say something like all political comments or all political statements these days are designed to make lies sound truthful, murder sound respectable, and to give the appearance of solidity to pure wind. That comes
Could you
from
uh could you repeat that, Mr. Connolly? You cut out for a second. To make lies sound.
to make lies sound truthful, to make murder sound respectable, and to give the appearance of solidity to pure wind. I have heard that I've lost count. I could never tell you how many millions of times I've seen that in print, in British newspapers, God knows how many times, especially in The Guardian. And I've heard people retailing that on the radio, and I've heard it on television. People quote George Orwell over and over and over and over because he's worth quoting. And it's in the essays that you find his best quotes. I'm sure, oh, well, I'm not sure. Have you ever heard someone say, all art is propaganda, but not all propaganda is art?
All art is propaganda, but not all propaganda is art.
Yeah. Oh, you hadn't
Uh,
heard that before.
no,
Well,
it's making me think.
well, well. Anyway, that's a classic example of George Orwell from his essays, and what an important one that people quote all the time is that those who abjure violence may only do so because somebody else is committing violence on their behalf. That is the ultimate way that you attack a pacifist. They can't. There's no way of getting out of that one. That's like having your hands tied behind your back. You know, those who abjure violence can only do so because somebody else is always committing violence on their behalf. It's that's Orwell. You know that's the man at his peak. That's the greatness of his mind right there. And you find as I say, you find it all in his essays. And his essays, everything he ever had to say about like the atom bomb. There's a great essay, You and the Atom Bomb. Everything he ever had to say about the Spanish Civil War, all the stuff that he wrote about Gandhi. He wrote a marvelous essay on Gandhi. They are jewels, absolute jewels of English literature. And you can tell how much the establishment appreciate what amazing works of literature they are because they're not taught in school. They don't teach them in school. Kids in classes, they never get to read them. You have to discover them as an adult because the establishment does not want the public to be able to think critically. If you read George Orwell's essays, you will have no trouble being able to think critically.
Wow, excellent! I'm definitely going to be adding that to my short list of reading, and yeah, I'm always open for book recommendations and adding books to my list, and I think that the audience really appreciates it too, because I usually try to go back and list all the books mentioned in my interviews, which I think a lot of people really glean a lot of great resources from. So you actually started writing fiction first, is that true, in the form of screenplays?
Yeah, I started out as a dramatist. Yes, my first professional work was for the BBC. Yeah.
What is your writing process like? Like, do you wake up, coffee, start writing, or are you like late at night, or how does that work for you?
Yeah. It's funny. We writers we get this kind of question a lot. In fact, the last time I was asked this, Addy, have you ever heard of Dalton Trumbo? That name?
Yeah, yeah. Isn't he? He's like they made a movie about him with Bryan Cranston. Isn't he from like like the first half of the 20th century? I want to say.
Well, your millennial generation. This man was one of the most beautiful guys who ever lived because he was the man who wrote Spartacus. He wrote the movie Spartacus, which is a movie everybody should see. It's absolutely fantastic. And I was intrigued about him myself, as people are now, intrigued by me. And I was very amused to learn that Dalton Trumbo had his own routine, was that he couldn't write unless he got in the bath. And he had a maid
Oh,
who would come
that's
in with
quite
a
an interesting
kettle.
routine to have, writing
That
in
is an
one's
interesting
bath.
routine. His maid would come in with a kettle and fill up the bath, and he had a special rack that went across the bath, and he used to sit there clumping away on this mechanical typewriter for 2 and 3 hours at a time while he sat in the bath. And that was apparently the only way that he could get writing done. It was absolutely fascinating to me to learn that, because everybody's got, all professional writers have got quirks. We all have quirks. Me personally, I don't touch coffee or tea or anything with caffeine in it, and you shouldn't. And that's goes, when I say you, I mean the rest of the world. Don't ever have anything that has, this will give you an energy boost. It will destroy your health. It doesn't matter if it's a soda, coffee, tea, sugar, anything like that. Anything that boosts your energy, get rid of it. That is when you will have energy. That is how I live my own life. I eat a lot of fruit and a lot of vegetables and clean cuts of meat, and don't have anything with junk in it or chemicals in it, or anything like that. That's how I do it. In terms of procedure, um, oh God, uh, I would say, generally speaking, I do my best work in the mornings and early afternoons. Um, the days when I could write from 7 in the morning until midnight, and sometimes you have to do that, are behind me now. That makes me ill. You get drained so much. But the writing process itself is uh, it's such a it's writing professionally. Ask any professional writer. It's such a strange business altogether. There'll be some days you'll wake up and you'll know there's something big, heavy, important that you want to write about, and your hormones will come up, and you'll be thinking about it, and yeah, come on, boom, 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 let's get this done. And you find the words just aren't there. This is what I find. It's just not quite gelled yet. And there have been days when I've like cleaned up the whole house and fixed the car and done this and done that, and I've lost you again, Annie. Where's your
I'm back.
yeah? Sometimes that happens. You get so full of energy and desire and want to write, and then find that you're not quite ready. And when that happens, you just have to be patient. And it's the strangest thing, because anybody who was observing you would say you were being lazy or not getting on with your work. And it's not like that. A writer works pretty much all the minutes and seconds that he's awake. Every minute, second that I'm awake, I'm thinking. I wish I could turn my head off many, many times, and I cannot do it. There's many, many times I can't get to sleep at night from thinking about Ghislaine Maxwell or Jeffrey Epstein or Prince Andrew or I know it sounds totally ridiculous, doesn't it? But that is the way that writers are. And the other side of it is it also, there'll be times when you'll think to yourself, okay, I'm ready. I can get this down, and I know what I want to say, or do I? And then when you actually get the paper in front of you, the best moments are where you think to yourself, I'm gonna write something, and it's huge, it's enormous, it's big, it's this big, it's this big, it's this big, and there's so much of it. And the skill of writing, obviously professionally, is to compress something and compress something and compress something until it's manageable, and it's something that you could read and take something from. And you go into it thinking to yourself, okay, this is going to be 5 pages, it's going to be 10 pages, maybe it's going to be 20 pages. And then just every now and again, you do it in one sentence. And when that happens, you give yourself the day off, or I do anyway, because when that happens, it's so exciting that you've said something that is so. incredibly important. I'm fishing now for an example because you'd be
Mm.
perfectly within your
I
right.
think I know what you're referring to, and I don't know that I've ever experienced that myself, or I'd be able to recall it. But it's like saying what you want to say in no more words than are necessary, but still in a still has kind of the rhythm of a
Yeah,
well written paragraph or a sentence.
exactly. Yeah, it's still euphonious. It's still got rhythm, as you say, but you've nailed it in one. Actually, there's a moment in my movie where I hope you remember that bit where I was trying to make people aware of the way in which the rich throughout the ages have hired bully boys to do their dirty work. And it felt like, because I was aware that this has been something that the Romans did, the Greeks did, the Egyptians did, it happened all the way through the Middle Ages, it's still happening now, etc., etc. So it felt like it was a huge thing. But once I got writing, it hit me very hard that this was the first time in human history with Nazism. And then I got the sentence that the rich had enough money to hire an entire country of thugs to do their dirty work. And that was one of the most exciting. It's very easy to read. It's very easy to talk about. It's very easy to listen to. Try writing it.
Right, right,
you'll
yeah,
you'll find it's not so easy.
right, yeah. It's like making the sausage, right? It's usually harder than it looks, and I do remember
Yes.
that portion from the documentary, and it really made an impression on me because World War II for me was a very personal kind of hook into history and interest in history because it was such an inflection point of war, technology, politics, and globalism in a way that
Mm,
really hadn't happened before. Somewhat to
exactly.
an extent in World War One, but it was
Yeah.
the technology really wasn't there yet,
Yeah.
and really the military strategy. So you have all of these kind of aspects of humanity that reach an apex in a very violent way. And the way that I believe I was taught it, because that's really all I can share as my experience, was that it was the good war, was World War II. It was the good war. It was the
Mhm.
fight of good versus evil.
Yes.
And that
That's how it's presented. Yeah.
romanticizing of,
Sorry,
uh,
I
of World
missed
War
that
II,
bit, Addy. What,
which I think is from,
your sound broke up
yeah,
there.
I'm cutting out a bit. How might you hear me now, Mr. Riley?
Still crackling a
Mic
little
check,
bit.
mic check. Okay, Addy Ads here with Francis Richard Connolly. Uh,
Yes, okay, yes,
can
I
you
can
hear me?
hear that now.
Okay.
That's okay now. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah, you were saying,
the
please,
romanticism.
please go on, because it's very important. Is what you say, that this is how the Second World War in the history books is presented to
Mm,
children in school classrooms. That it was just a very, very simple matter of this, you know, toothbrush mustached lunatic Hitler over here with his, dark evil forces, and oh, he's basically brainwashed an entire nation all by himself, just like that. And they just do what he says and do the most evil things, including the Holocaust. And over here, you have the Americans in the American way and the British with the British way. And, we've all got lantern jaws and we're all tough men and we're all such sweet, decent, etc., etc., etc. And it is presented that way as nothing other than than a battle between good and evil, and we just happen to be
mm,
the good guys. And real life isn't like that.
right, right,
Sorry. Please go
and
on.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Connolly, for providing some framework to what I'm saying and expounding on it, and not just World War II. I'll just side tangent for a second here on the American Civil War. It was in college then I started reading about that, and I noticed the Wikipedia change. This is the first time I noticed Wikipedia pages changing. Was the American Civil War page, and I went on it, and it said, which I still don't agree with, but at the time I think this was 20. This is the summer of 2016. Uh, and it said most historians agree, and again, I don't believe this, that the war was fought over slavery. And now, if you go on now, I haven't checked recently, but it's definitive. It's the war was fought over slavery. which even that latter statement, the former statement, I don't agree with. But it was the first time that I had seen historical revisionism in front of my eyes.
Yeah.
And going back to World War II, the interest hook was for me really big because everybody's experience of the war was slightly different. Whether it's a nurse in Australia, a GI in the
Yeah.
Pacific, paratroopers in Europe, people back home. It's just so fascinating reading the boots on the ground and the macro strategy and geopolitics as well. But when I saw when Dave was telling me about your documentary and how Hitler was financed by American venture capitalists, that was like some pretty serious cognitive dissonance that took a bit of time to process, because I was like, man, that makes sense. Like, because it's like, how did this one guy create the Autobahn all by himself, and all these stories we get told, even now, 75 years later, right? What's the classic insult? That guy's like Hitler, 75 years later. And you never hear about Mao Zedong, and you only tangentially hear about Joseph Stalin, or, and there's a bunch of other, despotic dictators, Pol Pot and I think it was King Leopold, right? He killed
Leopold.
he committed genocide as well. And you don't hear about these people. All you hear about is Adolf Hitler, right? And again, somewhat Stalin, just because they were our allies. And I just wanted to impress that upon you, that really changed my understanding of World War II, which for me is still a great interest point. I love reading about it.
Good for you.
Thank you, Mr. Conolly. We're wrapping up here, almost 2 hours, and I'd love to do this again. I want to be respectful of your time, sir, and just say thank you again for agreeing to chat with me.
This has been a real pleasure for me, because it's the first time, excuse me, that I've been interviewed by a man your age, and I think you've done. Could you just let me have one sip of water? I'm just at that. Oh, one sip of juice. I'm just at that moment where
no problem. Take your time.
Where the throat is starting to dry up. But anybody out there who's watching this interview, because you have found it yourself with the way you've been boozing all the way through. Drinking all the way through, I should say. I do beg your pardon. But this is what happens to men who do this, though, Addy. The throat dries up. It's very difficult. People just don't realize it who've never done public speaking. It's not easy. But no, it's been a much more interesting experience than normal for me, because, as I say, I've never been interviewed by a man who's so young, and I think you've done a fantastic job. I really do. And I hope that this helps your own career, because you seem to me to be coming at history with the right skeptical attitude, because this is the thing that we need to impress upon people, is that everything that's ever been said about history being written by the winners is true, and it's being written by the winners now. And they're still trying to control the narrative right now as we're living. I mean, can you imagine how if you were to write a history book right now about the whole Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein, Prince Andrew saga? I mean, you can just imagine what that book would be like if it was left to the establishment to provide it for school children. There'd hardly be any references to Prince Andrew. And if there were any references at all, they certainly wouldn't be references which intimated even slightly that he was a child molester. So, you're doing something critically important at a critically important time. So, I hope people will appreciate the efforts that you've made today. It can't have been easy interviewing a man like me. I can totally see that, for a man your age. And so I thank you very much yourself, Addy. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Definitely, Mr. Conolly. My schedule is quite open, and I'm fortunate enough to have the time to invest in this sort of work, even if it's not necessarily paying off at the point in time. But got about 5 minutes left here before we hit our 2 hour mark. That's a great, I think, great closing statement. But I just wanted to ask for just a couple more recommendations. You mentioned some books and a couple films, but film. I just wanted to ask about films and documentaries. Documentaries that you find to be very influential on your own understanding of the world. So we can go maybe nonfiction documentaries and great films, because I know you sent me a World War II film from 1957, which I'm going to check out as well. But I love asking for the audience because they love getting new recommendations.
Now, you were breaking up there again, Ali. But do I understand you want me to say that, like the best movies for people to see first? Would you say?
Yeah, because you sent me that I think it was from 1957, a film which I'm going to check out. I believe it was a
57.
World
Yeah.
War II film, actually. And
Yeah.
then so we'll go on the fiction or the Hollywood or film side, and then the documentary side as well, if you have any recs, because people love. I think the audience loves getting new material to check out.
Well, in terms of understanding the world and understanding the past, that one that I recommended to you, which is called The Enemy Below with Robert Mitchum. The thing is, it's a great movie. It's not going to be a waste of anybody's time, you see. Anybody who wants to learn about what men were like then. The reason I recommended it to you is that amazing speech that Kurt Jurgens comes out with when he's there with his second in command, where he says to them, and it will shock people today to hear a man say, here's a photograph of my two sons. One is a cinder in a burned aeroplane. This is during World War II. One is a cinder in a burned aeroplane, and the other one is at the bottom of the sea. He's lost both of his sons at the age of like 18, 19. And then he says, and I'm glad, because that's the way for warriors to die, young and with faith. And the point is that the establishment, the rich, the bankers, the landowners, the mega rich at the time, they knew that that's what men were like. They lived by a code of honor, which is gone now. It's been forgotten. There's a line in a song that Peter Gabriel wrote where he alludes to the fact that in the Middle Ages, honor meant far more to a man than life. You would die for honor. You wouldn't let any other man push you around. It was really a means of survival. That's what it was really all about in the Middle Ages. You couldn't back down to a bully in any sense whatsoever. You had to draw your sword or draw a knife. This, by the way, for anybody who's ever wondered, is why we shake hands. Have you ever wondered why we shake hands?
Is that so I know you don't have a weapon in your hand?
Exactly.
Or, yeah.
That's it. It's to show that you're unarmed. You see, I go to you like that, you go to me like that, and we shake hands. It became a gesture of friendship. Yeah, exactly. That you see, in the Middle Ages, you couldn't back down. That was the honor code, and the honor code survived right up until the Second World War, and that's why Kurt Jurgens says he's glad that his sons have died with honor, young and with faith. And the establishment used that. This is the most important lesson. The establishment always know the public better than they know themselves. They know you better than you know yourself, and you don't realize it. And, Americans and how they respond to their flag and their nation and the idea that they have of what America is in their own head. The establishment know this far better than you might imagine. And this is so crucial to understand, because this is how they control whole populations with this, kind of understanding.
Okay. Wow, that's great, Mr. Conolly. I really appreciate your time today, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in.
Me too.
And
Oh, my lips are orange.
and we're gonna do it again at some point. I hope soon to learn more from Mr. Conolly, and I will link his documentary in the description as well as his other links. Anywhere else you want to direct people to, Mr. Conolly?
Oh, do you know? I have to say here and now, Addy, that in terms of documentaries, although there have been some good ones that have influenced me, um, I mean, one that was important during the writing of Everything Is a Rich Man's Trick was Hitler's American Business Partners, that you can still see online. Hitler's American Business Partners. That you may find that interesting, but I have to say, and this is going to sound terribly arrogant, and people are going to say, "Well, you're only saying this because people have said millions of times that your documentary is the greatest documentary ever made, and you think you're the king of documentary, etc., etc." But I, most of the time, I am so frustrated by documentaries that it makes me tear my hair out. It really does, because people just don't know how to do it. The whole point of a documentary is to tell you something important that you don't already know in as few words as possible, and then try to illustrate it with some kind of picture if there is some kind of visual source. There isn't always a visual source, and that's the great enemy of documentary making, is that you can't always get a visual source. But I generally find today, at this moment, that there is hardly anybody left who knows how to make a really great documentary. It wasn't the case when I was a student. When I was doing my degree, there was a documentary series that I don't know if you've heard of it, called Horizon, on BBC Two. Have you ever heard of the Horizon series of documentaries?
No,
Well,
I don't believe so.
most of the time it dealt in science. Not always, but generally it was science. They did a wonderful documentary. Um, well, there was a couple that were absolutely outstanding. One was called "Now the Chips Are Down." I don't know if you can still find that, but this was when the microchip was first invented, and it was first starting to make a really big impact on society, and people didn't know where things were going to go with the microchip at all, because we were being told then, oh, a couple of years, everything will be run by computer. There'll be no need for men. This is what we were being told, and a lot of people swallowed it. A lot of people believed it. I knew it was totally wrong. I knew that 99% of the claims that computer scientists were making at the time were false, because computer scientists don't understand creativity. That's something that we could talk about for hours some other time. I don't want to go too far down that road. But another one that was terribly important, and I've forgotten the name. Jeez, it was about the military industrial complex, and oh God, what was it called? Give me a second here, because this is important. You may want to see that the Race to Ruin. The Race to Ruin. That is an excellent documentary, and the Americans who were featured in that documentary were very bright and very important people. It was the first time that anybody really had gone at the military industrial complex and gone at the American system of commissioning weapons with a critical eye. And it was definitely one of the greatest documentaries and most influential documentaries ever made. But I have to say that there's nothing of that standard being done today. If I remember rightly, the editor of Horizon at the time was called Simon Campbell Jones. Is that right? Simon Campbell Jones? But he must have been one of the great intellects that this country ever produced, because Horizon as a series, it never disappointed. It always told you something that you didn't know and illuminated some subject in a way that was valuable. And it was very noticeable to me that when the dumbing down started, which we really started to feel at the beginning of the 90s, that all of the people who I knew who had a brain and who had any capacity to think independently all started saying, have you noticed what's happened to Horizon? It's going downhill, going downhill, going downhill, and it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And they were right, because it was really at the start of the 90s that the establishment started to realize that we were all getting, as far as they were concerned, much too well informed and much too intelligent. And that was when they started to basically fire and get rid of and hamstring all of the people who are in British broadcasting at the time who were men of great intellect. And basically, there are none left now. That's why I'm
Yeah.
here, not working for the BBC.
Yeah. I won't swear when speaking about the BBC, but that's fascinating.
Well,
You
it's
see that?
difficult.
Yeah, yeah, it is, isn't it? That's almost 30. Well, it is 30 years ago now, right?
It is, yeah.
31 years ago.
30
So
years of
you
dumbing down.
so you would say that started in the early 90s before I existed. Wow, that's that because I didn't even. That's a good question. Is like when did it start? Because I noticed in college, like I'd always kind of actively repelled politics, believe it or not, just because of the way my family spoke about. I'd never pitched in at the table or Thanksgiving, and I just got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. And when I would read articles, uh, and I would say I read more than most people, which is probably unfortunate because I probably don't read as much as a lot of people think I do. But just referencing that statistic, and I can now tell if somebody is being neutral in the writing. And I think I've had this ability since then, or if they're trying to persuade you, or if they're being disingenuous. And I just found it more and more I was like, this guy's he's trying to persuade me in a very, very weak way. He's not doing it very well to take up his cause or whatever. And that's just one, I think, symptom of that dumbing down. But that's interesting. I've never really heard anybody put a date on when that started because
Oh, yeah.
it really accelerated, I think, over the past few years to where it's the point where it's like I don't understand how, for example, let's say the boomer generation and some of the Xers that I know, let's say, I don't understand how they don't question the mainstream media as a whole after everything that we've seen. I just don't understand. It's like, can't you see that they're being very disingenuous with their reporting? Yeah, it's interesting. I still struggle with understanding how
It's you
people.
see, Andy, it's difficult because the broadcasting that we had, and it was interesting to me that Jason Goodman was so forthright and accepting about this because he did say that he accepted that in the 60s, 70s, for most of the 80s, that UK broadcasters were heralded throughout the world as being a different standard to the rest of the world, and at that time they were. We made the
Yeah,
best
the
programs.
best.
Yeah, I mean, and we weren't just the best at science or history or kids programs. We were the best at everything. I can remember. I don't know if you've ever heard of Noel Edmonds, but in the days when he was doing this kiddies thing called Swap Shop on a Saturday morning, Dutch kids who always are wonderfully polyglottic. They can speak. Most Dutch children have to learn English, French, German, as well as Dutch when they're at school and learn it very well, because it's such a tiny little country. They are told if you go anywhere, it doesn't matter which direction. If you go that way, if you go north, south, east, west, it doesn't matter. Within an hour, you're talking to someone who's speaking a different language to you. You see, so they've got to learn languages very well at school. So consequently, you had 12-year-old, 13-year-old kids writing to Noel Edmonds in London, and they'd sent a letter from Amsterdam, and they would be saying, "Oh, Mr. Edmonds, please, can you not come here and show the Dutch how to make a good television program? Because the Dutch don't have a bloody clue." And at the time, they didn't. The Dutch broadcasting was appalling. In fact, it was something that the British used to joke about. There was a lot of sketches on comedy shows about, this is Norwegian TV, and this is Danish broadcasting, and this is and they were all speaking in exactly the same stupid way, and it became a stereotype how useless they were. It's not the case now. They have caught us up, and I would say even past us in some ways. There was a very intelligent Dutch broadcaster who had Jeremy Paxman. Do you know who that is on his show? The Newsnight presenter?
I've heard of him.
Yeah, well, he was presenting Newsnight during the Jimmy Savile scandal when it was breaking. And this Dutch broadcaster really put him on the carpet very, very cleverly and said, "Well, come on now, you must have known what Jimmy Savile was really up to. And the editor must have known. And, the producer must have known. You work in the same building, Mr. Paxman. You're just next door to this, and you're just..." And Jeremy Paxman, it's online if you want to see it. He really, really got under pressure, and really, I've hardly ever seen anybody so obviously caught out as a liar. He did it brilliantly. This Dutch journalist, far better than I've ever seen anybody do it on British TV. So that it's a tragedy that can hardly be compared with anything else. We had the best documentary filmmakers, the best kids programs. I mean, those were the days when Thomas the Tank Engine was being made, and that used to win awards all over the world for being the best kids program that there was, and it was. And this has all been taken away by the establishment purely and simply to protect the worst and the most errant members of the establishment, like Prince Andrew. They simply do not want, as your great man George Carlin said, they don't want the British public, nor you, nor anybody in the world who speaks English, to be capable of critical thought. And they've taken it away for that reason. It's disgusting. It's as I say, totally tragic.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that about the stereotypes of the other European broadcasters. But yeah, I mean, I remember even when I was a child, like my certain members of my family held the BBC in the highest regard in terms of mainstream media, and now it's like I don't even pay attention anymore. I mean, sometimes I look at the headlines, but it's MI5, right? It's MI5, MI6.
Well, the thing is, this is why I go back to what I said earlier. That you see, I mean, we have a paper here called The Guardian. I don't know if
oh my God, I don't know what's worse, The Guardian or The Telegraph.
Well, exactly. You see, there was a time when you could have gone to The Guardian for truth. Yeah, I mean, George Orwell spoke very highly of The Guardian. It was known as the Manchester Guardian then. And journalists in those days really did go after truth, and if they had it, they told it. All of the newspapers, I mean, The Guardian to this day keeps trying to tell people, we give you the truth, and we never back away from it, and you can trust us, and all this bullshit. I wrote to The Guardian editor after I'd been on the Justin Stellman show, and I'd used the opportunity that Justin gave me to talk to Donald Trump and ask him about the story about the 7 feet high jihadi warriors. I don't know if you ever came across this, but there was a story. It was on Fox News, and there was film of it, which showed you a group of what they said were Coptic Christians These little men in orange suits, and they're being led along a beach, which somewhere in the Middle East, they said, and they're being led to be beheaded, it said, by ISIS warriors who were all dressed in black. And when people saw this story, they immediately said, something wrong here, because uniformly they were 7 feet tall. All of the jihadi warriors were 7 feet tall. Some genius who knows how to do, I wouldn't be able to do this, I don't think you could, but they'd been able to do measurements from the video. And I'm not even sure that was necessary, because the other men barely came up to the elbows of these 7 feet tall giants who were leading these Coptic Christians away to behead them in the name of Islam, you see. And of course, people immediately said, well, this is obviously fake. This is just another attempt to, instill fear into the population and make people in America and Britain and one thing or another think that ISIS have got an army of 7 feet tall jihadi warriors. Well, I, as I say, put this to Donald Trump and said, you have to say, Mr. Trump, let me get the finger right. You have to say, Donald, is that a fake story or not? Yes or no? It's dead easy. It's either fake or it's not. You talk about the Daily Telegraph. Even the Telegraph, Addy, were, doubting the veracity of this story. Donald Trump, you may not be surprised to hear, never made a statement about this. I wrote to The Guardian and I said to them, look, I've just been on the Justin Stellman show. I talked about this with Justin. I, held out a fig leaf or, olive branch, whatever you want to call it, to Donald Trump over this. Don't you think it's worth printing this in the paper? Because he never said anything about the 7 feet tall jihadi warriors. The Guardian never wrote back. And I recently wrote to 2 other Guardian journalists, one called David Pegg, about a good story that they did on the Queen, because they revealed that the Queen has far more powers than people had previously thought, certainly than they had previously thought, to basically squash any bill, the reading of any bill, the content of any bill that she doesn't like the sound of or the look of. And one of the reasons that she did this recently was that there was plans to take the Duchy of Cornwall, which is an area of Cornwall, and allow people to buy their own homes in that region, much more than they've been allowed to previously. Well, the Prince Charles gets most of his income as the landlord of the Duchy of Cornwall. The amount that they gave was 22 million a year that he makes from the Duchy of Cornwall just in ground rent. I had to think about that, and I can't remember the figure that I came up with now. But I felt that the true figure must be something more like 10 times more than that, if you think of how many homes there are in Cornwall. But the point is that the Queen was saying that this bill was not going to go through because it would take away Prince Charles' income. This is the kind of power, you see, that she has. And I wrote to David Pegg, who wrote the story for The Guardian, and I said, look, you've done terrifically well here. This is the kind of thing that The Guardian should be doing. Have you heard of my film? I'm Francis Richard Conolly, the UK film director. You must have heard of Everything is a Rich Man's Trick. It's mainly because of me that we've got this, wokist culture that, Piers Morgan has done everything in his power to pervert and to make people think it isn't what it really is, etc. And again, no reply, doesn't write back. So you have to, at this moment in time, Addy, say flat out that absolutely, this is why it's so difficult to work out how much autonomy the mainstream media journalists have and how much they don't have. Because it does seem at this moment that it's a fair statement to make that everybody working for the BBC, everybody working for ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, and absolutely every journalist on absolutely every single British newspaper, including even the local independent papers. The local independent paper where I live has been as responsible as anybody for misinformation, especially over things like terrorism. Go ahead.
Did you say including even local independent journalists?
Definitely, yes. When the Manchester alleged attack happened, what's the name of that stupid pop star that they were saying that it was her concert?
Oh, was
You
that
will know.
Ariana Grande? Ariana Grande?
Yes,
Was that the bombing or whatever?
there was supposed to be a bombing at the Ariana Grande concert. And straight away, just as I expected, there were people who went online who were looking at the crisis actors who were involved and looking at the evidence which proved that that there was no bomb inside the arena, particularly because there were no windows broken within the foyer. They said that was where the bomb went off, and there were no windows broken at all within that area. And my local paper here, the Yorkshire Evening Press, they were as important as anybody in retailing the disinformation and the misinformation about. I mean, they were saying that there were kids here who had been victims and who'd been involved in it. I went to see a couple of them, and it was bloody obvious they hadn't been involved in any bombing. I mean, you see, one of the problems that your generation has got is that you've never been trained in explosives and in weapons and in the use of things like hand grenades, you see. And you don't know what bombs and grenades and explosive devices do to people, and how people in my father's generation were taught to behave if they thought they were going to be near an explosion, and what explosions do to people. The thing that my father's generation were always taught was that if you think there's a hand grenade or a bomb or whatever about to go off, get down, shut your eyes as hard as you can, and force your fingers into your ears as hard as you can. Because anything like an explosion, moving air at tremendous velocity, that's either going to blind you or it's going to burst your eardrums, you see. So the two kids who I went to see, I said to them, well, you said you were halfway out the door when a bomb that had enough brisance, that's how you say it, enough explosive capacity, to kill 20 people and injure another 100. That must have been, that would have to be at least the combined explosion power of 15 to 20 modern fragmentation grenades. That's how big that must have been. And I said to them both, well, what do you think that would do to you? And they both said, oh, we're not sure. And I said, well, you wouldn't be able to hear me asking the question. The mere fact that you're answering the question tells me that you're lying, because it would have burst your eardrums. So, load of bull. And like I say, this was the kind of stuff that my local paper, and you'll find that right throughout the country, that wherever you have a newspaper that's got any kind of solid readership, and certainly my local paper, I think it's about 50,000, every single day. And that's a lot of people, It's at least half the population of this city. Anything that's got a circulation, absolutely anything in this world that can have a really strong political impact, people at the top, they will either try to control it, or they damn well will control it. And the means of control generally is that they'll just buy it, because they've always got the money.
Right. Yeah. Money is power.
Money.
As we mentioned before. Well, thank you again, Mr. Conolly. And if you could stick around for a second after I end the broadcast, I would love to do that, just to chat for a second before I let you go.
Sure.
This has been a full-length interview with Francis Richard Conolly. Everything is a Rich Man's Trick is on YouTube, various YouTube channels. And the full-length one's about 3.5 hours. Is that correct? Because there's a couple
That's right.
different versions.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. If anybody who goes looking for it, Addy, they need to find a version that's 3 hours and 27 minutes, and just a few more seconds after that. There are versions that have been put online by misinformation agents that are like only 2 hours long. And people in the comments have always said, "What the hell have you done here? This isn't the full film." So thank you for bringing that up. Yes, please be aware. Anybody who wants to see it, it's 3 hours and 27 minutes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, folks. We'll see you next time, and stay frosty.